"Move it, you worthless piece of trash." The words sliced through the air like a whip, sharp and venomous. The bank was bustling with people, but all eyes turned to the scene unfolding near the entrance. Judge Marcus Carter, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his late 40s, stood frozen, his dark brown eyes wide with shock. "Hands where I can see them." Linda barked, her voice echoing through the bank. Marcus raised his hands slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "Shut your mouth." Linda snapped, her face red with anger. The humiliation burned like a fire in Marcus's chest. Linda grabbed his arm roughly, her nails digging into his skin. "You're coming with me," she said, her voice dripping with malice. Marcus's mind raced. As Linda dragged him toward the exit, Marcus's thoughts turned to his family. But Marcus wasn't just a judge. He was a fighter. The police station was a cold, sterile place, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on the pale walls. Linda sat across from him, her arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. Linda leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. The door opened and a tall, broad-shouldered man entered the room. "Judge Carter," Harris said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Captain, you know this is wrong," Marcus said, his voice pleading. "Enough," Harris barked, cutting him off. As the door closed behind Harris, Marcus felt a wave of despair wash over him. But even in the darkness, a spark of determination remained. The hours turned into days and Marcus remained in the cold, sterile cell. One night as he lay on the hard cot, Marcus heard a faint knock on the door. The door creaked open and a familiar face appeared, Angela, his wife. Marcus's eyes widened as Angela handed him a folder. "Linda Harper," Angela said, her voice low. Marcus's mind raced as he processed the information. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. At the defense table, Linda Harper sat with her shoulders hunched. Marcus Carter stood at the front, his navy blue suit immaculate, his posture radiating confidence. His dark brown eyes scanned the room, taking in the sea of faces. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all were waiting to see how this drama would unfold. At the defense table, Linda Harper sat with her shoulders hunched, her once proud demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. Her blonde ponytail was frayed, and her pale face was etched with worry. She kept glancing at the door as if hoping for a miracle that would never come. Her lawyer, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline, shuffled papers nervously, his eyes darting between his client and the judge. Marcus's lawyer, a sharp and determined woman named Evelyn Torres, stood beside him. She was in her early 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and a reputation for winning impossible cases. She had taken Marcus's case pro bono, not just because she believed in his innocence, but because she saw this as an opportunity to expose the corruption that had plagued the police department for years. The trial began with Evelyn's opening statement. Her voice was calm but powerful as she laid out the case against Linda Harper. She detailed the events at the bank, the false accusations, and the abuse of power. She spoke of Marcus's reputation as a respected judge, a man who had dedicated his life to justice. And then she dropped the bombshell, the evidence Angela had uncovered. Evelyn presented the documents, the photos, and the recordings that proved Linda's involvement in a web of corruption. She showed how Linda had targeted Marcus to cover her own tracks, to divert attention from her illegal activities. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Evelyn remained composed, her eyes fixed on the jury. When it was Linda's turn to speak, her lawyer tried to downplay the evidence, to paint her as a victim of circumstance. But his arguments were weak, his voice lacking conviction. Linda herself remained silent, her eyes downcast, her hands trembling. The prosecution called witnesses, bank employees who had seen the confrontation, colleagues who had witnessed Linda's erratic behavior, and even a whistleblower from the police department who had been too afraid to come forward until now. Each testimony added another layer to the case, another nail in Linda's coffin. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus took the stand. He spoke calmly and clearly, his deep voice resonating through the courtroom. He recounted the humiliation he had endured, the pain of being treated like a criminal simply because of the color of his skin. He spoke of his faith in the justice system, a faith that had been shaken but not destroyed. "I became a judge because I believed in justice," Marcus said, his eyes locking with the jury. "I believed that the law could be a force for good, a tool to protect the innocent and hold the guilty accountable. What happened to me was a betrayal of that belief. But it also showed me that the fight for justice is never over. We must always be vigilant, always be willing to stand up for what is right." The courtroom was silent as Marcus finished his testimony. Even the reporters seemed to hold their breath, their pens hovering over their notebooks. The jury's faces were unreadable, but Marcus could see the impact of his words in their eyes. The trial dragged on for weeks, each day bringing new revelations and new challenges. But through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. He had faced the worst that life could throw at him, and he had emerged stronger. He knew that this was not just about him, it was about everyone who had ever been wronged by the system, everyone who had ever been silenced. In the end, the jury's verdict was unanimous. Linda Harper was found guilty of corruption, perjury, and abuse of power. The judge sentenced her to 10 years in prison, a punishment that felt both just and insufficient. Marcus watched as Linda was led away in handcuffs, her head bowed in shame. He felt no joy, only a quiet sense of relief. But the victory was bittersweet. Marcus had won the battle, but the war was far from over. He knew that Linda was just one piece of a much larger problem, a system that was deeply flawed and in desperate need of reform. And now he was more determined than ever to fight for that change. As he left the courtroom, Marcus was greeted by a crowd of supporters, friends, family, and strangers who had been inspired by his story. Angela was there, her eyes filled with pride and relief. She hugged him tightly, her warmth a reminder of what he had been fighting for. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You stood up to them and you won." Marcus held her close, his heart swelling with gratitude. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready. He had faced the worst and he had emerged stronger. And now he was ready to fight for a better future, for himself, for his family, and for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. The fight back had begun, and Marcus Carter was ready to lead the charge. The months that followed the trial were a whirlwind of activity for Marcus Carter. The victory in court had been a turning point, but it was only the beginning of a much larger battle. Marcus knew that the system that had allowed Linda Harper to abuse her power was still intact, and he was determined to dismantle it piece by piece. He returned to his role as a judge, but with a renewed sense of purpose. His courtroom became a platform for change, a place where he could not only deliver justice but also advocate for reform. He began to push for stricter oversight of law enforcement, for policies that would hold officers accountable for their actions. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, drafting proposals and meeting with community leaders, activists, and politicians. One of his first initiatives was the creation of a task force dedicated to investigating cases of police misconduct. He handpicked a team of lawyers, investigators, and community advocates, all of whom shared his commitment to justice. The task force quickly gained traction, uncovering several cases of abuse and corruption that had been swept under the rug for years. But the road to redemption was not without its challenges. Marcus faced resistance at every turn, from within the police department, from politicians who feared losing their power, and even from some members of the public who believed that the system was fine as it was. There were moments of doubt, times when the weight of it all threatened to crush him. One particularly difficult day, Marcus found himself sitting in his office, staring at a stack of files that seemed to grow taller by the minute. He had just received news that one of his proposals had been blocked by a powerful senator, and the frustration was overwhelming. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face, and let out a deep sigh. Angela walked in carrying a cup of coffee. She set it down on his desk and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't save the world in a day, Marcus," she said softly. "But you're making a difference. You have to remember that." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I know," he said. "But sometimes it feels like it's not enough. Like I'm fighting a losing battle." Angela smiled, her eyes filled with love and determination. "You're not alone, Marcus. You have me, you have your team, and you have an entire community behind you. We believe in you. And we're not going to stop fighting until we see real change." Her words were a balm to his weary soul. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift slightly from his shoulders. He picked up the cup of coffee and took a sip, the warmth spreading through him. "Thank you," he said. "I needed that." With Angela's support, Marcus pressed on. He began to speak at public events, sharing his story and calling for reform. His speeches were powerful and impassioned, and they resonated with people from all walks of life. He became a symbol of hope, a beacon of what could be achieved when people refused to give up. One of the most significant moments came when Marcus was invited to speak at a national conference on criminal justice reform. The auditorium was packed, the air buzzing with anticipation. Marcus stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. He began by recounting his own experience, the humiliation, the betrayal, the fight for justice. He spoke of the flaws in the system, the ways in which it failed the very people it was supposed to protect. And then he called for action. "We cannot stand by and allow this to continue," he said, his voice ringing out with conviction. "We must demand accountability, transparency, and fairness. We must fight for a system that truly serves justice, not just for some, but for all." The audience erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the auditorium. Marcus felt a surge of hope, a belief that change was possible. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready. He had faced the worst and he had emerged stronger. And now he was ready to lead the charge for a better future. As he left the stage, Marcus was surrounded by people who wanted to shake his hand, to thank him, to share their own stories. He listened to each one, his heart swelling with empathy and determination. He knew that this was just the beginning, that there was still so much work to be done. But he also knew that he was not alone. He had a community behind him, a team of dedicated individuals who shared his vision. And in that moment, Marcus Carter knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because he had faced the worst and he had emerged victorious. And now he was ready to fight for a better future. For himself, for his family, and for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. The road to redemption was long and difficult, but Marcus was ready. He had faced the worst and he had emerged stronger. And now he was ready to lead the charge for a better future. The final twist in Marcus Carter's journey came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. He was in his office reviewing case files when a letter arrived. The envelope was plain with no return address, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable, Linda Harper's. Marcus hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding as he stared at the letter. He hadn't heard from her since the trial, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. But curiosity got the better of him and he opened it. The letter was long, written in a shaky hand, and filled with raw emotion. Linda began by apologizing, not just for what she had done to Marcus but for everything. She wrote about her own struggles, her insecurities, and the toxic environment within the police department that had shaped her. She admitted that she had been wrong, that she had let her prejudices and fears cloud her judgment. And then she asked for forgiveness. Marcus read the letter twice, his emotions swirling. He felt anger, sadness, and even a flicker of pity. Linda had caused him so much pain, but now she was reaching out, asking for a second chance. It was a moment of reckoning not just for her but for him as well. He sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the letter, wrestling with his thoughts. Could he forgive her? Did she deserve it? And more importantly, did he deserve the peace that forgiveness might bring? Finally he made his decision. He picked up a pen and began to write. A week later, Marcus stood outside the gates of the prison where Linda was serving her sentence. The sun was shining but the air was heavy with tension. He had requested a meeting with her, and after some back and forth with the prison administration, it had been approved. Now as he walked through the cold, sterile halls, he felt a mix of nerves and determination. Linda was waiting for him in a small visitation room. She looked different, smaller, somehow her once proud demeanor replaced by a quiet humility. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her blue eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and fear. When she saw Marcus, she stood up, her hands trembling. "Judge Carter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming." Marcus nodded, taking a seat across from her. For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging heavy in the air. Finally Marcus spoke. "I read your letter," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and I've thought a lot about what you said." Linda looked down at her hands, her face flushed with shame. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, "but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. For everything." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had rehearsed this moment in his head 100 times, but now that it was here, the words felt harder to say. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving," he said finally. "It's about letting go. And I've decided to let go of the anger, the pain, the resentment. Not because you deserve it, but because I do." Linda's eyes filled with tears and she nodded, unable to speak. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. What you did was wrong and you have to live with that. But I believe people can change. And if you're serious about making amends, then you have a long road ahead of you." Linda wiped her tears and looked up at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "I am serious," she said. "I want to do better. I want to be better. And if there's anything I can do to make things right, I'll do it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine desire to change. And in that moment he realized that this was the ultimate test. not just for Linda but for him as well. Could he truly forgive? Could he let go of the past and move forward? "I'll hold you to that," he said finally. "But know this, forgiveness isn't the end. It's the beginning. And if you're serious about making amends, then you have to prove it. Not just to me but to yourself." Linda nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." The meeting with Linda marked a turning point for Marcus. It wasn't just about her redemption, it was about his own. He had spent so much of his life fighting for justice, but now he realized that true justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about healing, about creating a world where people could learn from their mistakes and become better. In the months that followed, Marcus continued his work as a judge and an advocate for reform. But he also began to focus on restorative justice, on finding ways to bring people together and repair the harm that had been done. He worked with community organizations, schools, and even prisons to create programs that emphasized accountability, empathy, and growth. Linda, for her part, kept her word. She became an advocate for prison reform, sharing her story and working to change the system from within. She and Marcus didn't become friends, but they developed a mutual respect, a recognition of the roles they had played in each other's lives. The final twist in Marcus's story wasn't just about Linda, it was about him. It was about his ability to rise above the pain, to find strength in forgiveness, and to use his experiences to create a better world. He had faced the worst that life could throw at him, and he had emerged not just victorious but transformed. As he stood in his courtroom one day, looking out at the people who had come to seek justice, Marcus felt a sense of peace. He knew that the fight for justice was never over, that there would always be more battles to fight. But he also knew that he was ready. He had faced the worst and he had emerged stronger. And now he was ready to lead the charge for a better future, for himself, for his family, and for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. The glimmer of hope that had flickered in the darkness had become a flame, and Marcus Carter was ready to let it burn.